gearnetwork.com.
The following is a presentation of the Gear Radio Network.
You're listening to the Sabrecast, brought to you by Better Live Than Dead. And now your hosts, Brayton Wilson and Ryan Wolfe.
And with that, we welcome you to the Sabrecast, powered by Better Live Than Dead and the Gear Radio Network. This is Season 2, Episode 11, entitled, What Is Even Going On? You can hear us on BetterLiveThanDead.com, Gear Radio Network, GearNetwork.com as well, Apple Podcasts, Bullhorn, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Pandora, the Radio.com app, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. I am Ryan Wolfe at Wolfe BLTV, joined on the Card Media Hotline by Brayton Wilson, the man himself, at BJ Wilson, WGR. Brayton, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Just getting ready for another exciting hockey game tonight.
Hell yeah. And the best part is, welcome back to the Twilight Zone. It's February, and the Sabres are bad.
Oh man.
Stop me if you've heard this one before. Feels like the same story every single season. And hey, our three big things brought to you by FortunePhoto.com. First on the docket, the wheels on the bus, Brayton, they are falling off. The Buffalo Sabres, let me get the stats popped up here real fast just so I can hit you with some numbers. The Buffalo Sabres currently, they are in 10 points behind the Toronto Maple Leafs for the final wild card spot, or for the Atlantic Division, I apologize, and 11 points behind Philadelphia and Columbus for the final wild card spot. They are 26, 24, and 8 in 58 games, 4-5-1 in their last 10 games. Brayton, what is going on with the Buffalo Sabres? Just in a nutshell, you tell me your thoughts right now on the Buffalo Sabres.
Well, obviously, since they came back from the All-Star break, they had a perfect opportunity, a prime opportunity to be able to get some wins and close the gap in on some of these teams. With 9 home games and 10 games overall, right out of the All-Star break, and they completely just fell apart. There were games that they should have won right off the bat, especially against Montreal and Ottawa. They got a nice win against Columbus, but then they've got some other ugly wins, ugly losses against teams like Colorado and Detroit. Just not enough when they needed them most. And it's unfortunate because, again, you could have easily closed the gap and won a few of those games instead of losing them. And instead of being 10 points out of today's game against Toronto, you're talking about maybe being, 4 points out of a potential playoff spot. So, it was disappointing that they got off to such a terrible start after the break. And, they bounced back with a couple of nice wins, one against Detroit recently, and the most recent one against Columbus. It's nice to get a guy like Victor Lynch in the back of the lineup, but, it's the opportunities that they needed to capitalize on, they just haven't, and it just results in them shooting themselves in the foot with a Uzi and then reloading that Uzi and continuing to keep shooting themselves.
Now, this is something that we've talked about on Twitter ad nauseum at this point. And a lot of the same media members are mentioning that the tank failed. And I wanted to kind of clear the air here really quick to just to get a point across, because I've seen some good takes and some bad takes on Twitter. And Brayton, certainly give us your thoughts here in just a moment. So the media dredges up those old tank takes, and it's really just two of the same people, which we all know. If you follow them on Twitter, you know who it is. You know who we're talking about. It's exhausting and honestly hilarious, because if you recall, the whole point of being bad was to get a franchise player, which Buffalo could not get to come to Buffalo, because first off, those players are not available. And second off, when if those players do happen to become available, they go to teams who are close to winning or already winning. Now, with the tank talk, Jack Eichel is projected 104 points in 81 games this season. He has 73 points in 57 games, 32 goals and 41 assists. I'm calling it here. The tank talk is dead. The tank worked. They got Jack Eichel. The problem with the franchise has been and continues to be the ineptitude of the front office, whether it was Darcy Regeer's inability to draft top talent towards the end of his tenure, last 5 first-round picks being Ristolainen, Girgensons, Grigorenko, Armia, and Pysyk, Pesek. Tim Murray's mouth writing checks that his ability to make trades couldn't cash, and now Jason Bottrell's unhealthy obsession with collecting defensemen while the offense struggles mightily. Now, to put this into perspective for you as well, Brayton, since Jason Bottrell has become the general manager of the Buffalo Sabres, thank you for the stat here, naturalstattrick.com. Buffalo's expected goals for per 60, an NHL worst 1.97. I mean, come on. They can't score goals. Now, mind you, when it comes to goals allowed, they're one of the better teams in the league. They're tied for let's see here. That would be tied for eighth least goals allowed per 60. So they're doing fine there. They should be able to win some hockey games. But when you're scoring 1.97 goals per 60 or expected to score those goals, and the good teams like the good goal scoring teams like Carolina's at 2.62, Toronto, Pittsburgh, and Vegas at 2.5, you're not going to win a lot of hockey. So again, the problem here, you look and you see they can't score goals. And what do when they can't score goals? They go out and get more defensemen. I mean, we just saw recently, they trade a month or so ago, they trade Marco Scandella for a late pick. They waive Zach Bogosian, who ends up in Rochester and apparently will be reporting to the Rochester Americans. I don't know, Brayton. I think the problem is pretty obvious, and it doesn't seem like Jason Bottrell either is able to understand that or just doesn't have the ability to make trades to help out the offense. It blows my mind.
I think the more problem is the latter point where it certainly seems like he's trying to make deals and he's trying to make this team better. The problem is obviously the question is, why have you waited this long to try and do it? And maybe it's because teams obviously don't want to make the trades with the Sabres just because they know that, they don't have the scoring up front and they don't necessarily have the assets to really give up in order to go acquire some of that necessary talent. Now, obviously, anything can happen and that can change on a dime, but certainly the Sabres have a problem with trying to get those forwards, and some of their top prospect forwards or, players that are in the future aren't necessarily ready to go yet. I mean, Dylan Cousins is tearing up the Western Hockey League and played a really good World Juniors, but obviously he needs the rest of the season to play in Lethbridge, and then the rest, if they happen to have an early elimination, he can go to Rochester on an amateur tryout deal and play out the rest of the season there. Casey Middlestat, obviously, he's, as Jason Bottrell put it, he would rather have him play in the AHL and thriving than rather in the NHL surviving, which, honestly is a move that should have been made. They made the right move and they made it at the right time. So, there's some other prospects and other players that seem like that, they're just not ready to make that jump yet. And, it's hurting the NHL team because they desperately need that offensive production, and they just can't find it anywhere. And they've got too many of these players that are more of the grinded out type of players. They're not going to put up a lot of points. They're going to drive offense, but when it comes to putting pucks in the back of the net, that seems far and few between. So, some teams probably don't want to give up some of their assets because either A, they're playing really well, or B, the Sabres don't necessarily have the pieces. And sure, they have plenty of defensive assets that they could use to go get a forward. But again, what team really wants to make a deal, if they don't need the defensive help? So it's frustrating just because, this team needs the offense and they need to find more ways to put the puck in the back of the net, and they just can't do it. And no matter who the coach is, it hasn't really come to fruition yet. So,
well, the one thing that was pointed out too about making a potential trade, and there's a few different interesting scenarios going on right now. First off, you see, they send down Lawrence Pilot, they waive Zach Bogosian, they call up John Gilmore, who John Gilmore's cap hit is $700,000, so he's essentially an extra defenseman who would serve in that Bogosian role, which Bogosian was doing. He had played I think once in the last month, so you get his cap off the books, you save yourself $1 million plus, I believe it was. A little over. you send down Lawrence Pilot, who, let me look at his number really quick. It's $925, so you're saving another $225,000. So on top of that, you then hear potentially, as Chad D. Dominicis, good friend of the podcast and also my boss, he tweets out, quote, "A team to watch with a deadline a week from tomorrow is Vegas. The Sabres and Knights have been talking for a while now about a forward. Vegas is looking for help on their blue line. We'll see if something gets finalized by next week." He also goes on to say, "For what it's worth, Jonathan Marchessault is a name I heard that was discussed. Not saying he's the primary target, just a name I heard that's being discussed." And that would be a move that would help. I mean, it would certainly help Buffalo. My presumption being, and I have no inside knowledge here, just looking at the stats or the cap hit here, the cap friendly website, I should say, the cap hits here. It's got to be Rasmus Ristolainen that would go the other way, because you look at, first off, Vegas traded Colin Miller. So I can't presume. And that was a move that when Bottrell made the move, he wanted that guy. So he made the trade for that guy. So hard to see him being traded. Brandon Montour, again, Bottrell traded for that guy. I can't see him trading Brandon Montour. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm kind of splitting off ideas here, but at the end of the day, my thought process is this. With Brandon Montour, he's going to have a contract after this year like Rasmus Ristolainen has right now. And at that point in time, you'd make the decision, are you paying Rasmus Ristolainen 5-4 for the next 2 seasons after this, or are you going to pay Brandon Montour, someone who you went out to acquire and arguably like more than Rasmus Ristolainen, to be your long-term, I don't know, top pair with Rasmus Dahlin or your second pair defenseman? That's a decision that needs to be made, especially because after next season, you've got, if Henry Jokiharju has another good season, he'll get a nice hefty raise. Rasmus Dahlin is going to get a hefty raise once he hits restricted free agency. So there are a lot of questions that have to be answered. But again, you have to decide which direction you're heading in. I mean, not even if you look over to the offense is struggling. Yes. Michael Furlick has been a help, but clearly not as much of a help, I guess, as Jason Bottrell would have expected when he acquired him. Understandably so. He wasn't doing great in Calgary, and he's also hurt right now. But you look at a guy like Connor Sherry, a guy like Jimmy Vesey, a guy like Evan Rodriguez, a guy like Zemis Girgensons and Johan Larsson. Pretty much everybody that is either a pending RFA or a pending UFA, I would say, aside from Sam Reinhart, Victor Olofsson, and probably Curtis Lazar too, you look at them and you go, okay, all these guys could be traded, because I really think that a guy like Johan Larsson or Zemgus Girgensons on a playoff team in a third or fourth line role would do well, because they play very heavy hockey. And when the playoffs roll around, heavy hockey is what helps push your team to the next level. And I feel like guys like that will succeed, and guys like that will be easily acquired at the deadline. But with that being said, again, if you do that, what direction are you heading in? I guess that's kind of, end of the day, that's my question. Where are you going with this? Because it seems as if Jason Bottrell just says, hey, we've got all these defensemen, we want to trade them, but no one wants to trade. It's like, okay, well, why didn't you think about that in the summertime? Or, hey, we're struggling scoring goals offensively because the players that we acquired that weren't great in the first place are struggling to score. Why didn't you think about that in the summertime?
Yeah.
It blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to you, Brayton, and I'm sorry to everybody that listens to the podcast right now, that I feel like every time we talk on the podcast, we're talking about the same thing. But again, it's the definition of insanity. It's like, we don't expect things to change, but it seems like Jason Bottrell just goes, you know what? We're going to put Jimmy Vesey. We'll see Jimmy Vesey on the top line, and things will be better, and things don't get better. We'll see Connor Sherry in a bigger role. Things will get better. They don't get better. It's like, at what point in time something got to change? And again, Victor Olofsson was a big factor in the Sabres last game. He scored 2 goals. He's been incredible. He's had a great season. He's been arguably one of the best, if not the best, rookies in the National Hockey League. You can send your hate to me on Twitter for that one, but you shouldn't be pinning your offensive hopes on a 24-year-old rookie.
Right. Yeah, no, you shouldn't be pinning any hopes on that aspect alone, just because obviously you have to have a full team. And I mean, the Sabres have some pieces down the road that will be impactful. I mean, Eichel, Skinner, Olofsson, Reinhardt's got to get a new contract. I kind of worry about what they're going to have to pay him. Dahlin obviously on the blue line. You hope that Brandon Montour is going to turn into something long-term. Henry Jokiharju, maybe Lawrence Pilot will get an NHL look full-time next season. But, I mean, the Sabres right now certainly have some assets that are likable for the future. It's just that everything else just sort of right down the, I don't even know what to say, just not exactly the right pieces here moving forward. It's just one of those things where, hopefully you could build some more pieces around them next year and going into the long term, but it certainly is not promising right now. So
I mean,
now it's all just about trying to find the right pieces and trying to find those assets to build for the future. And that, I don't know if that's going to come for the draft or for prospect with developing, or, I mean, the wrong way to go would be free agency, but we'll see.
It's incredibly frustrating too, because you see, again, Jack Eichel having a career year. He's projected to score over 100 points. You've got Sam Reinhart on pace for another strong season where he's expected to score 30 goals. That doesn't happen by accident. Victor Olofsson on pace for 28 goals. I mean, going down the list, Rasmus Dahlin, 19 years old, or 20, he'll be 20 in April. 51 points projected. That's unreal. I mean, Jeff Skinner is having a down year, yes, but still projected for 17 goals. You look at it and you think to yourself, okay, so you've got this high-end talent. You've got Eichel, Reinhart, Olofsson, and Skinner. And then you've got Dahlin on the defense. You don't have to do much work to make this team a potential playoff contender. And right now they're on pace for 84 points. That's for how bad they were to how much better they've become. There's still a long way for this team to go. That's not a terrible season by any stretch of the imagination. But looking at what they have and what they've done to put themselves in a better position, and you could argue there's a lot more that they could have done to not only prepare themselves, but there's a lot more that they could have done throughout the process of the season to put themselves in a better position. I mean, they've got picks, they've got prospects. They could have gone out and tried to make a deal to bring in a goal scorer, because look if the Buffalo Sabres went out and were able to solidify that second line, even if the third line and fourth lines were Sherry, VC, Gergensons, Oposo, guys that just go out and really just, they'll score here and there, but they won't score with consistency. You still probably could have limped your way into a playoff, not necessarily a position, but at least the conversation. Not being 11 points out midway through February, looking at another lost season. So again, it's frustrating to watch, because the team they keep talking. It's the same talking points. It's, we got to get rid of the guys who have had the losing stink on them. But then again, Rasmus Ristolainen is still here. Zemgus Girgensons is still here. Johan Larsson is still here. I mean, at what point in time do you just say, you know what, we're just going to take a complete dive and we're going to jump in head first and we're going to give it our best? I mean, they finally got rid of Zach Bogosian. Who knows if he'll be back this season? Like you mentioned, Casey Middlestat, he belongs in Rochester. And that's another thing that scares me about Middlestat, is that with Dylan Cousins, as we've seen with Jason Botterill, he sends down Casey Middlestat, arguably too late, but Middlestat has a resurgence and has had a relatively good second half of his season in Rochester. But might that scare you away from bringing Dylan Cousins up to the National Hockey League roster if you may not think he's ready, or you think he's ready and then you realize he's not, because you got kind of burned with Middlestat? Because we look at what Botterill has done with trades. He gets burned by the Ryan O'Reilly deal and then essentially just sits on his hands saying no one wants to do anything. But it's probably because, you're not offering enough, or your trades are bad, whatever it may be. It's just, it's so frustrating to watch, because again, we've been doing this for almost 10 years. Where they've been bad. They keep trying to sell us the farm, and they're doing nothing about it.
Yeah, I mean, if Jason Botterill has any fear to make moves or to call up a player and not, learn from his mistakes, I mean, then he shouldn't be in the business right now. He shouldn't be the general manager of the Buffalo Sabres. And, I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I mean, it is frustrating to see that, oh man, he did such a great job with the Jeff Skinner trade. He obviously got lucky and drafted Rasmus Dahlin #1 overall, and it seems like some of his other draft picks have turned out really well. The development of some of these prospects that were Tim Murray's picks now under the order of Jason Botterill have actually turned out to be pretty well. And,
Dylan Cousins seems like he's going to be maybe on the NHL roster next season with a little bit of muscle buildup and everything like that. There are some things that are very bright, but I mean, the negatives have completely outshined the positives in Buffalo.
Absolutely.
And it's because it just absolutely swallows up anything good that Jason Botterill has done. I mean, the Ryan O'Reilly deal has backfired so harshly that you had a guy quit on the team and go back to Sweden. You had a young prospect who you kept up here way too long, and you waited way too long to send him back down. And this year he comes up for one game and gets hurt for the end of the season. And just, I mean, there's just a bunch of things piling up against Jason Botterill's favor. You had the 7 defensemen. You failed to make any type of trades to help your offense out that just continues to struggle. And that's kind of what Tim Murray did in the year that he got fired. Outside of him opening his mouth and saying some things that I don't think the organization liked as a whole, he also, when Jack Eichel got hurt right at the start of the year and missed that time into November, he kind of sat on his hands and just said, all right, let's watch and see how this plays out. And obviously it didn't help them out at all. The team struggled. The team couldn't score. The team didn't defend well under Dan Bilesma. And he didn't really act at all. And that was part of it. I think that was sort of reason why that he got fired. But I think this regime's going to be a little different, where I don't think Jason Botterill is getting fired at the end of the year. I think at least they're going to give him one more off season with the salary cap space that they have to work with, and the opportunity here to try and maybe turn things around with more salary cap space. Maybe that'll give the Sabres a little more inclination to go out and, maybe acquire a player that you can throw the salary cap in and be fine with. But I don't think they plan on firing Jason Botterill at all this offseason or right after the season. I think that he gets at least this offseason into next season to see how things go. And, obviously Ralph Kruger, that's a topic of discussion because, is he better fitted in a coaching role or is he better fitting in an executive role? Because, I mean, obviously he was a chairman in the English Premier League with Southampton and was highly regarded over there when he was hired. And he comes back here and takes back a head coaching job. But maybe a better role for him would be to serve as in an executive role in Buffalo. And then maybe you bring in Chris Taylor or you bring in another coach that has more experience or knows how to handle these younger players and know the little quirky things that it takes to coach these younger talents and younger kids in the NHL. So, it'll be interesting to see what they do this offseason. Obviously, we have to go through the NHL trade deadline first, which is 8 days away from today. But, things might get interesting in the little short while here. But obviously, I think it's just one of those rest of the seasons where, hey, there's 24 games left in the season. Might as well just fight this rest of the season out and see what happens. And hopefully you hope for the best. It's probably not playoffs, but just at least get to competitive status. If you miss out by 5 points in the standings to get to the playoffs, hey, that's perfect. I mean, I don't think you could have asked for anything more, but I don't know if it's going to be that close, but as long as you could finish off the season and get to the 85 to 90 point range, I think that's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. And it's more of a step forward than it is 2 steps back.
I think for me, the one thing I want to see moving forward, and I guess we can kind of wrap on this because that was a very good point you made there. I think to give Jason Botterill some credit here, first off, Rochester is great. They've been very good. They've struggled a little recently, but they've been very good. I would want to make sure that whatever he does at the deadline doesn't detract from what Rochester's done. Don't have a mass exodus of players.
Right.
Don't go out and trade 7 guys and then call up CJ Smith and Casey Middlestat and Rasmus Asplund and guys like that. Try to let them stay down and continue to do what they're doing because that's important. I think that's very important for Rochester to continue to do what they're doing. But on the same token, I really like what Botterill did taking a chance on Curtis Lazar. I think Curtis Lazar has been underrated this season for the Buffalo Sabres. He's only playing about 11 minutes and 51 seconds a game, but right now he has a 50.9 face-off win percentage. He's taken 234 face-offs. He's won 119. I think that in an increased role, maybe he becomes If Johan Larsson gets traded, maybe he becomes Johan Larsson and gets the opportunity to kind of be a shutdown guy on a third line or a fourth line. That would be great. I think taking a chance on a guy like that. That's what you need to do in seasons like this, because again, you only get so much time to develop and figure out if a guy's got it or not, if he fits your system or not. And if you're playing not necessarily meaningless games in February and March and into April, but if you've got National Hockey League games where you can test a guy out in certain situations, I think that's a great idea. Now, my thought process, Brayton, across the board is this: when it comes to Jason Botterill, when it comes to Ralph Kruger, when it comes to all of the players that are either restricted or unrestricted, if they are not your long-term answer, or they are not a part of your team long-term, walk away. If going into this offseason, if you determine Jason Botterill's not your guy and you're not going to extend him, get rid of him. If you're not bringing back Zemgus Girgensons, Johan Larsson, Jimmy Vesey, Connor Sherry, Michael Frolik, trade him. Because again, at some point in time, you need to just cut bait and move on. And it's not smart, in my opinion, to say, you know what? We're going to give Jason Botterill another season. And if it doesn't work out, we'll fire him. Because that tells me whoever's running the show has absolutely no idea what they're doing. Because again, it makes no sense to bring someone in for a lame duck season and then after that say, you know what? We thought we'd give you another shot. You screwed the pooch, and now we're letting you go. Because that just, to me, is quite possibly the dumbest thing you could do. And I think that would I don't know. I think it would set this franchise back even a little more further than it already is, because you're going to give a guy the opportunity to trade players, to sign players, and then go, we don't want you anymore. It's stupid.
Yeah. It's a certainly difficult situation to kind of ponder and to kind of put together. I mean, you definitely don't want to set this franchise back even more. However, if you don't feel comfortable with this situation, you might just have to bite the bullet and make these type of moves in order to help try and progress this franchise forward again. Instead of taking another 2 steps back. It's something that the Pagulas have to figure out on their own. It's something that, they'll have to decide whether Jason Botterill is cut for the cloth for this type of position. And they've had 3 years to have him in the mix here and to put him in charge of building this roster. And it's been very much so more on the negative side than the positive side. But
I think if anything, the best way to resolve this issue, and I know we always talk about more power is probably worse, but I say give Botterill a 1-year extension, so that way it's not a lame duck season, and then bring somebody in above him but below Terry Pegula who can keep him honest, because right now that's another thing that doesn't seem like this organization has a lot of is accountability. And if Jason Botterill continues to say, I've got a direction, and Terry Pegula goes, okay, I believe your direction. If you have someone there that goes, no, I don't like what you're doing, this is how we need to change it, or this is what I think, or whatever it may be. Get a smart hockey mind in there above him if you're going to bring him back. I know a lot of people have clamored for a guy like Mike Gillis. I don't, anybody who has hockey knowledge, I'm not saying go out and hire them as the GM, but just put them in a position of power above them where they can hold them accountable, because it really seems like the organization just lacks accountability, top down, left to right. And it's been a problem for a very long time now and only continues to get worse.
Yeah. I think this off season is going to be a very interesting one. And I know that we're still 24 games out from getting to that point, but I
just want to be able to watch Sabres hockey in the playoffs, man. That would be great.
Oh, of course, anyone does. I think everyone here in Buffalo has had enough of just the missing out on the playoffs and missing out on the fun and want to get back to the playoffs. I think that there's going to, I think that it would have to take an absolute meltdown in the final 24 games of the season in order for Jason Botterill to lose his job. Like, let's hypothetically say the Sabres win only like 4 or 5 more games, and they finish the season with maybe like 72, 74 points, then maybe that's an instance where they decide to cut their ties with Jason Botterill, move on and bring someone else in, or bring a couple of other people in that would know, that would have a good idea of how to run a hockey team and how to put together a hockey team. But I think at this point, I think, again, if you could get to 85, 90 points, that's an okay finish to the rest of your season. You're obviously not a playoff team, but I think that's kind of where you want to be. I know the projected points, I think, according to Micah Blake McCurdy, is 84.8. So if you finish over there, that's okay. But I think it would take an absolute meltdown at the end of the season, similar to last year, where we only win 2 games in the month of March out of 16. That's a complete meltdown. If that happens again, then I think there's going to be some. I'm going to go ahead and say this and sound really corny saying it. There's going to be some bodies hitting the floor.
Heads are going to roll. I like that. Bodies at the drowning pool. Let the bodies hit the floor. I like that.
Yep.
Well, hey, we'll get together after the trade deadline. We'll talk some trades, hopefully some big trades. If not, we'll just talk about whatever happens, because I'm sure nothing will happen. But I'm always negative. So Brayton is at BJ Wilson WGR on Twitter. I am at Wolfe BLTD on Twitter as well. We are the Sabrecast.
If you are not.
Caught you in a yawn there. We'll talk to you sometime very soon. And as always, my friends, go Sabres.
The preceding presentation has been brought to you by the Gear Network.